The night had that eerie stillness that only appears before something breaks. The sky hung heavy over the old highway, as if the darkness itself knew what was coming. The club rode in formation, engines rumbling like distant thunder, unaware that fate had already chosen its moment. Among them was the one rider whose laughter could cut through any storm, the man they all called Brother Four. He had survived more roads than most men could imagine. Yet on that night, betrayal waited in the shadows. No one saw the first flash of light. No one heard the whisper of danger before it struck. But when the sound of gunfire ripped through the silence, the world seemed to stop. Bikes swerved, gravel exploded beneath tires, and in the chaos, one rider fell. Brother Four hit the ground hard, his motorcycle skidding into darkness. His brothers shouted his name, but the ambushers vanished into the night as quickly as they came, leaving behind only smoke, shock, and a brother who would never rise again. When the club reached him, the sight carved something deep into their souls. Kneeling beside the fallen rider, the president, who had known Brother Four for more than 2 decades, felt the weight of a grief too heavy for words. He had lost brothers before. He had buried men he loved like blood. But this one felt different. The silence among the riders wasn't just sorrow. It was a promise forming in the dark. A promise that no man who took a brother's life would walk the earth without consequence. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the world in shades of ash and gold, the club gathered around the place where their brother fell. They didn't speak. They didn't argue. They didn't hesitate. Each man placed a hand on the cracked pavement, as if touching the last heartbeat that still lingered there. And in that moment, a decision was made, not born from rage alone, but from loyalty, honor, and the code they lived by. A code older than the road itself. No brother is left behind, and no betrayal goes unanswered. The engines roared again, louder this time, not as machines, but as a battle cry. The club rode out not for violence, but for justice. Not for revenge, but for remembrance. They weren't chasing blood, they were chasing truth. And as the wind howled against their faces, each rider carried the same burning vow. Whoever set that ambush would learn that the bond between brothers isn't something you break without paying the price. A storm was coming, one forged from grief, loyalty, and the unstoppable force of men who refused to forget. The club rode in silence as the sun climbed higher, each mile tightening the knot of anger in their chests. Brother Four's empty spot within the formation felt like a wound that refused close. They had ridden that highway together for years, through storms, through victories, through nights when the only thing that kept them alive was each other's presence. Now, the rhythm of their engines felt incomplete, fractured. No one spoke, but every man carried the same question burning inside him. Who would dare ambush a brother on their own territory? The answer mattered less than the promise they had already made. Back at their compound, the atmosphere was heavier than the air before a storm. Patches, helmets, gloves, all were laid on the table where Brother Four usually sat, each object a silent reminder of the man they lost. The president, a hardened rider who had lived more than 6 decades on 2 wheels, gathered his men around. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Someone set us up," he said, his tone steady but sharp enough to cut through steel. "And someone's going to talk." There was no rage in his words, only certainty. The kind of certainty born from brotherhood forged in blood and miles. Their first lead came from an unlikely place. A retired mechanic who had worked on Brother Four's first bike more than 20 years earlier. The old man had seen headlights on the ridge the night of the ambush, lights that didn't belong to anyone local. He described the shape of the vehicles, the glint of something metallic on their rooftops, and the strange symbols painted on their doors. The club listened with the intensity of men preparing for war. Each detail was a piece of the puzzle, and each piece brought them closer to the truth. But truth rarely travels alone. Halfway through the conversation, the mechanic hesitated. He lowered his voice, glancing toward the door as if shadows were listening. "Your brother wasn't the target," he whispered. "You were." Those words sent chills through the room. The president clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. If Brother Four died because someone wanted him gone, then the guilt would never leave. The men around him, sensing his turmoil, silently vowed to carry that burden with him. No leader walks alone, not in their world. That night, as darkness wrapped around the compound, the club gathered outside around a fire. Flames crackled, sending sparks into the sky like tiny souls seeking freedom. Each rider stepped forward, one by one, sharing a story about Brother Four, stories of loyalty, laughter, sacrifice. No one cried. Their grief was too deep for tears. But the fire reflected in their eyes told a different story, a story of vengeance that had already begun. And as the wind howled through the trees, they made another silent promise. They would not rest until the truth was dragged into the light. The next morning, the club split into smaller groups, each tasked with following a different lead. The road stretched ahead like a battlefield, full of shadows and echoes of what had happened. One group rode toward the ridge where the mechanic had seen the headlights. The land looked untouched, but the ground still held faint signs of tire tracks, deep, heavy, and not for motorcycles. Trucks, one rider muttered. Military grade. That detail tightened their suspicions. Whoever ambushed them wasn't just reckless. They were organized, prepared, and dangerous. Another group headed into town to question locals who lived near the highway. Most people claimed they saw nothing, but one woman, an elderly widow who had lived in the area for over 5 decades, remembered hearing something unusual that night. Not just engines, voices, multiple, arguing. She described the tone, the urgency, the sound of someone shouting a warning right before the shots rang out. Her hands trembled as she spoke, as if reliving the terror of hearing violence unfold so close to her home. The club thanked her with gentleness rarely seen from men who carried so much weight on their shoulders. Meanwhile, the president and 2 of the oldest members followed a lead of their own. A rumor whispered through underground circles. A rival crew, known for their reckless methods and obsession with territory, had recently been spotted near the border. They had history with the club, history stained with tension and bad blood. But even in their worst fights, no one had ever crossed the line into killing. If they were involved, then someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who wanted 2 clubs at war. Someone who knew how to weaponize loyalty. As the president rode toward the border, memories flashed in his mind. Moments with Brother for he hadn't allowed himself to fully remember. Nights spent fixing bikes, long desert rides under the moon, laughter shared over cheap beer and heavy stories. Brother Four had always been the one to crack tension with humor, the one who saw hope in places others saw only darkness. Losing a man like that didn't just hurt, it destabilized the heart of the club. The president tightened his grip on the handlebars, feeling grief sharpen into resolve. Whoever orchestrated this wouldn't just answer for the ambush. They'd answer for taking the light out of a family built in darkness. By evening, each group returned to the compound, sharing what they had learned. The puzzle was far from complete, but one truth stood clear. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. This was calculated, coordinated, and personal. As the men reviewed the clues under the dim glow of the clubhouse lights, a storm brewed outside, one that mirrored the storm forming within their hearts. They were closer now, closer than before, and the path ahead was no longer uncertain. It was marked with fire, steel, and the promise of justice. The storm outside intensified as the club gathered around the table. Lightning flashing against the windows like the world itself was warning them of what lay ahead. The clues they had collected painted a picture they didn't want to believe, yet couldn't ignore. A rival crew near the border. Military-grade trucks. Voices arguing before the shots. None of it aligned with a simple act of aggression. This was orchestrated, constructed with precision. The president studied the scattered notes, maps, and photos with the solemn intensity of a man who had seen too much loss to let any detail slip by. Brother Four wasn't just a casualty. He was a message, and they needed to understand who sent it. One of the younger members stepped forward, laying down a photograph he'd taken earlier that day. It showed a symbol spray-painted near the ridge, something none of them recognized. It wasn't the mark of any known club, crew, or gang. It was something new, something deliberate. The president leaned in, tracing the shape with his finger as thunder rumbled above them. Whoever did this wanted us confused, he said quietly. They wanted us chasing ghosts. The room fell still, the weight of his words sinking deep. But they underestimated one thing. Every man leaned closer. "We don't stop." Driven by the need for answers, the men rode to the ridge again the following morning. The rain had turned the dirt to mud, but it didn't erase the traces left behind. They found broken branches, bullet casings half buried in the ground, and footprints leading deeper into the forest, a trail the ambushers hadn't hidden well enough. The men followed it in silence, each crunch of leaves beneath their boots echoing through the trees. As they ventured farther, they discovered something chilling: a campsite, recently abandoned, a half-burned log, a tarp still dripping from the storm, and in the ashes of the fire, a melted patch. A biker patch. Not theirs, someone else's. But the shape was unmistakable. It belonged to a club they hadn't heard from in years. A club supposedly disbanded. The realization hit the president like a punch. Years ago, before most of the current members had even joined, there had been a feud, one that ended not with peace, but with an uneasy silence. The rival club had scattered, falling apart under its own corruption. But if they were resurfacing now, it meant the past wasn't dead. It was merely sleeping, and someone had finally shaken it awake. The president clenched his jaw, feeling the old wound reopen. The memory of battles fought, brothers injured, promises made in blood. If that ghost of a crew was back, their motives weren't simple. They carried grudges older than some of the men standing beside him. Night fell by the time they returned to the compound, their minds heavy with the implications. The room was filled with the hum of restrained fury, anger directed not only at the ambushers, but at themselves for failing to see the sign sooner. Brother Four's laughter echoed through their memories, a reminder of the man they'd lost and the justice they owed him. The president placed the burned patch on the table like an offering to the truth. "They think time made us weak," he said, his voice low and certain. "They think we forgot." The men straightened, their expressions hardening. "They're wrong." The following day dawned with a sense of purpose that no storm could overshadow. The club split into new teams, each assigned to track down fragments of information about the resurfaced rival crew. They dug into old contacts, bar owners who'd seen everything, truck drivers who noticed unfamiliar vehicles passing through at night, and highway patrol reports that hinted at sightings no one had bothered to connect. The deeper they dug, the more the story came together. A splinter group from the old rival crew had returned, nursing a grudge buried beneath years of bitterness. And Brother Four, by tragic chance, had ridden into their crosshairs. One team visited the outskirts of a nearby industrial zone, where rumors suggested the rival crew had been seen. What they found there was unsettling: a warehouse with boarded-up windows, tire marks leading in and out, and heavy chains securing the doors. The space looked abandoned, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air, like someone had been there recently. Footsteps echoed inside when the wind pushed against the walls, sending chills through the men. They marked the location carefully. This wasn't the place for confrontation. Not yet. They needed proof, solid, undeniable proof to confirm the signs. Meanwhile, the president and his closest advisors investigated the forest campsite again, this time following a shorter trail branching off from the original path. They found a tree scarred by a knife, an insignia carved into the bark, the same symbol spray-painted near the ridge. It was a proclamation, a warning, a challenge, and it was personal. The president stood still, rain dripping from his hairline, as he stared at the carving. The ambushers weren't hiding. They were sending a message, and they wanted to be found. Back at the compound, the tension reached its peak. The men reviewed everything they'd gathered: photos, symbols, footprints, tire patterns, and testimonies. The evidence was undeniable. The old rival crew had returned with purpose, and the ambush was only the beginning. "They're trying to provoke us," one member muttered, "trying to drag us into a war." But the president shook his head. "No," he said, "this isn't war." He lifted the burned patch from the table. "This is a score they think they can settle." His voice hardened. But they made one mistake. The men waited. They took the wrong brother. As the fire crackled in the corner of the room, casting shadows on the walls, the club made a choice that felt less like a decision and more like destiny. They would not strike blindly. They would not fall into traps or be manipulated into chaos. But they would get justice. Strategically. Precisely. and with every ounce of loyalty they carried in their bones. The president stood tall, his eyes burning with purpose. "We ride at dawn," he said, and every man in the room felt the weight of that promise settle into their shoulders. Firm, heavy, and unbreakable. Dawn arrived with a cold bite, the kind that seeped into leather and bone. The club gathered in the yard, engines humming in a low, unified growl. No one spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because every man understood the gravity of the moment. They weren't riding out for vengeance born of rage. They were riding for for the bond that tied them, for the code that kept them human even in a ruthless world. The president mounted his bike last, gazing at the rising sun as if waiting for a sign. When he finally nodded, the engines roared in unison, shaking the earth beneath them. Their hunt had begun. Their first stop was the industrial zone, the warehouse that carried the eerie, recent scent of activity. The club arrived quietly, spreading out with the caution of men who had survived too many ambushes to be careless. The warehouse doors were thick and rusted, but not locked the way they had been before. Someone had returned since their last visit. The men exchanged looks, a silent conversation born from years of shared battles. The president pushed the door open slowly, its metallic groans slicing through the still morning air. Inside, the space was empty, too empty. But the emptiness wasn't what caught their attention. It was the smell. Gunpowder, oil, fresh tire rubber. Someone had cleared out only hours earlier. The men moved deeper into the shadows, boots echoing softly against concrete. They found evidence of a hasty departure. Cigarette but still warm, a half-eaten meal, and in the corner, a map pinned to the wall with red markings circling key locations. Roads the club frequently used, bars they favored, and landmarks tied to their history. It was a chilling discovery. This wasn't random. The ambush had been part of a larger plan. They were being studied, tracked, followed. The president stood before the map, fists clenched, breathing steady but sharp. "They think they know us," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "They think they can predict our moves." One of the older riders stepped beside him. "Let them," he answered. "They don't know who we become when we lose a brother." The word sparked something in the group, a collective recognition of the power they carried not in violence, but in unity. The men began searching the warehouse for any clue the rival crew might have overlooked, leaving no corner unchecked. Near the back wall, hidden beneath a tarp, they found a breakthrough they needed, a small metal lockbox. Inside lay a burner phone, a set of keys, and a folded piece of paper. The note inside carried only a few words, scrawled in messy handwriting. "You should have finished us when you had the chance." The president's jaw tightened. This wasn't just revenge, it was resurgence. A ghost from their past had returned with vengeance, sharpened by time. And if the rival crew thought the club would crumble under fear, they were gravely mistaken. The men walked out of the warehouse with one truth blazing inside them. The past was no longer behind them. It was riding straight toward them. The burner phone was old, scratched, and nearly dead, but one number was saved inside. An anonymous contact with no name, no history, just a single-digit entry, 1. The president powered it up, glancing toward his men. "If this is a trap," one rider said, "we walk in together." The president nodded. "Always." He pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. Silence filled the line, thick and heavy. "You're late," a rough voice finally said. The president's eyes narrowed. "You ambushed my brother," he replied. "You think I wouldn't come?" A low chuckle echoed through the speaker, a sound that ignited every man's fury. The mysterious voice spoke calmly, almost amused. "Your brother wasn't the target," he said, "but he rode too close to a storm that belonged to you." The men exchanged tense glances. "Then face me," the president demanded. "Face all of us." The voice paused, then replied, "All in good time." The line went dead. The president lowered the phone slowly, a storm brewing behind his eyes. If the rival crew wanted to play games, they had underestimated the one thing they should have feared most, the club's unwavering loyalty. Determined to uncover the next piece of the puzzle, the men turned their attention to the keys found in the lockbox. One of them recognized the symbol engraved on the largest key, a local storage facility on the outskirts of town. The club rode there immediately, engines roaring across the asphalt like thunder rolling in from a distant battle. When they arrived, the facility was quiet, rows of metal units stretching into the distance like a maze of secrets waiting to be unlocked. The key fit Unit 34, a number that sent a chill through the president. 34 had been Brother Four's racing number in their younger days. This was no coincidence. Inside the unit, they found another message, painted on the back wall in bold letters. Blood remembers. Beneath it lay a duffel bag filled with weapons, rifles, ammunition, knives, and a single patch embroidered with the insignia of the rival crew. It was pristine, untouched, almost ceremonial. The message was clear. The rival crew wasn't hiding. They were preparing, building, fueling their ranks. The president picked up the patch, turning it slowly between his fingers. The men around him stiffened, feeling the tension shift into something sharper, something dangerous. "They want us to strike first," one rider whispered. But the president shook his head. "No," he said, voice low but resolute. "They want chaos. They want war." He looked at his men, brothers forged through fire, loyalty, and decades of hardship. "We'll give them neither." His words carried a weight that settled into the hearts of every man present. They wouldn't be manipulated. They wouldn't be baited into reckless violence. But they would find the truth. They would uncover the mastermind. And they would bring justice, not through destruction, but through precision, unity, and the code that defined them. As they left the storage unit, the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt. For the first time since Brother Four fell, the men felt clarity cutting through the grief. They were closer, so much closer, to understanding the force behind the ambush. And with each step forward, the storm inside them grew stronger, waiting for the moment it could finally break. Night fell heavy and thick as the club returned to the compound, the weight of each discovery pressing against their ribs like armor they could not remove. The men gathered in the main room, the air vibrating with a mix of grief, fury, and sharpened purpose. On the table lay the items collected so far: burner phone, keys, map, rival patch, like relics of a war someone else started, but they would be forced to finish. The president stood over them, shoulders stiff, eyes distant. He had seen ambushes before, betrayals, violence, but this was different. This was personal, and the ghost they were chasing knew exactly which wound to strike. One of the more seasoned riders, known for his quiet intuition, stepped forward and pointed at the map. "This isn't random," he murmured. "Look at the pattern. Every red mark lines up with a place where Brother Four had history. Places he rode, places he fought, places he lived." The room fell silent as realization settled like a cold hand on their throats. Whoever orchestrated the ambush wasn't targeting the club as a whole. They were targeting memories, attacking the heart of their brotherhood, one scar at a time. "They're trying to tear us apart from the inside," the rider continued, "using our past as the weapon." The president clenched his fists. He remembered the history all too well. The rival crew, once led by a man named Mercer, a ruthless leader who believed fear was the only way to control a territory. Decades ago, Mercer's crew crossed a line, and the president had stood against him. What followed was a brutal confrontation that tore the rival club apart. Mercer disappeared, and the men who survived scattered to the wind. No one ever found Mercer's body. No grave, no ashes, no closure. Now, standing before the clues, the president felt a familiar chill crawl up his spine. Had Mercer returned? Or had someone inherited his obsession? As the men continued analyzing the evidence, one rider pulled up a traffic cam feed from the storage facility's access road. The video was grainy, but a large truck passed through the frame at 2 in the morning, the same model described by the mechanic. On the back window, for only a split second, a tattooed hand rested on the glass. A hand marked with a distinct burn scar, one that the president recognized instantly. It belonged to Mercer's younger brother, a man believed to have vanished after the old crew collapsed. The confirmation made the room vibrate with tension. "It's a resurrection," the president whispered. "They're rebuilding." Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windows, as if the world itself felt the rising storm. The club members stood around their president, their resolve tightening like a chain of steel. Brother Four's laughter echoed in their memories, not as sorrow, but as motivation. The president finally raised his head, his voice steady and cold as he spoke. If Mercer's bloodline is back, then they picked the wrong family to haunt. The men nodded, faces hardened by loyalty and fire. For the first time, their grief felt like a weapon. And by dawn, that weapon would be sharpened. The next morning carried a strange stillness, the kind that felt like the world was holding its breath. The club rode out early, the sun barely cresting over the horizon, painting long shadows behind their bikes. Their destination was a remote stretch of desert road, known only to old riders and men who lived their lives far from the public eye. It was a place where Mercer's crew used to run operations, a place steeped in memory and danger, exactly where a ghost from the past might try to rebuild an empire. The road vibrated beneath them as their engines growled like a pack of wolves hunting prey. As they approached the old route, the desert heat shimmered across the asphalt, and the barren landscape stretched endlessly ahead of them. The club slowed, scanning the rocky terrain for anything out of place. It didn't take long. Fresh tire marks cut through the dust, multiple sets, heavy and recent. The tracks led toward an abandoned motel that had been shut down for more than 15 years. The president raised a hand, signaling the men to stop. The place looked dead, but the tension in the air told them otherwise. "They're here," the president whispered, watching. The men advanced with the discipline of seasoned warriors. They moved between the broken walls and shattered windows, eyes sharp, senses heightened. Inside one of the rooms, they found evidence of recent occupation: boot prints, cigarette ash, and a half-finished blueprint of the compound. Someone had been planning a second attack. "They were coming for us again," one rider muttered. The president nodded grimly. This wasn't meant to end with Brother Four. They wanted a war. The realization struck deep. Brother Four's death was just the opening strike in a larger plan. A calculated attempt to reignite an old feud Mercer's bloodline refused to let die. But the rival crew had made a mistake. They underestimated the resilience of men bound by loyalty, hardened by decades of standing shoulder to shoulder. The president stepped outside, his boots crunching over broken glass, scanning the horizon. A glint of metal caught his eye. Far off, a lone figure on a bike watched from a ridge. The rider wore a patch with the resurrected crew's insignia, a taunting invitation written across distance and silence. "They want us to chase them," snapped one member. But the president shook his head. "No, they want chaos. We give them control, we lose." The lone watcher turned and sped off into the desert, disappearing beyond the dunes. The message was clear. The rival crew was ready, waiting, and growing more confident by the hour. The president looked at his men, feeling their anger burn as hot as the sun above them. "We won't play their game," he said. "We play ours." The club remounted their bikes, engines rumbling not with rage, but with strategy. They had seen enough. The enemy wanted to be found, but on their terms. Now, the club would flip the hunt. They would track the shadows, expose the mastermind, and end this resurgence before it became an inferno. As they rode back toward the compound, dust swirling behind them, a single truth pulsed through every heartbeat. They were no longer chasing vengeance. They were pursuing justice with precision. And the men who ambushed Brother Four had no idea that the storm they ignited was about to break. And when it did, it would not be mercy they found on the other side. The ride back to the compound was different this time, quieter, heavier, charged with a focus that sharpened every thought. No one spoke, yet every man understood the shift that had taken place. They were no longer reacting to the enemy's moves. They were reading them, understanding them, anticipating them. And that change, subtle but powerful, meant the rival crew had already lost their element of control. When they reached the gates, the president gathered the men with a single gesture, his expression a mixture of sorrow, resolve, and something far more dangerous: clarity. Inside the meeting hall, they spread out everything again: the clues, the maps, the photos, this time arranging them chronologically. Step by step, they traced the rival crew's pattern across the city, their movements, their surveillance points, their attempts at psychological warfare. One writer pointed out that every location the enemy had chosen was connected not only to Brother Four, but also to the president himself. "This isn't about killing us," he said quietly. "It's about breaking you." The The room went silent. The men exchanged glances, some angry, some afraid, all fiercely loyal. And in that silence, the president felt a weight he had carried alone finally settle into the hands of his brothers. He stepped back from the table, breathing slowly before he spoke. "They think they know me," he said. "They think they know us. But they don't understand what keeps us alive out here." He glanced at each man, faces hardened by loyalty and layered with grief for the brother they lost. "We're not held together by fear. We're held together by honor, by memory, by the roads we've survived." His voice grew stronger. "And if they think taking one of us makes us weaker, they've never understood our family." The men nodded, fire igniting behind their eyes. The rival crew hadn't fractured them. They had forged them. Using every clue and every footprint, they began constructing a profile of Mercer's reorganized faction. Their numbers were small but strategic. Their movements were coordinated, and their intention was clear: force the club into a violent confrontation so public and catastrophic that the entire organization would crumble from blowback. But the president wasn't about to let decades of brotherhood be destroyed by ghosts with grudges and borrowed weapons. "We fight smart," he said, tapping the map. "We hit their foundation, not their fists." They would dismantle the rival crew's resurgence from the inside out, cutting off their leadership, their resources, and their hiding places with surgical precision. Before dismissing the man, the president walked to Brother Four's locker, untouched since the day he fell. He rested his hand on the worn leather jacket hanging inside, remembering the man who had been their spark, their comedy, their heart. "You didn't deserve this," he whispered under his breath. "But I promise you, they will answer for what they did." The vow carried through the air like smoke rising from a funeral fire, and every man present felt it settle into their bones. Justice wasn't an option anymore. It was destiny. The next morning, the club set their plan in motion. They split into 3 highly specialized groups: Tracker, Disruptor, and Infiltration. These weren't just random assignments. They were crafted based on each man's strengths honed over years on the road. The Tracker group followed the rival crew's routes through the desert, analyzing every turn, every hideout, every bullet casing. The Disruptor group targeted supply chains, fuel drops, weapon stashes, information pipelines. And the Infiltration group sought out old contact from the shadows of the biker world, men who owed them favors, respect, or silence. The operation wasn't fueled by rage. It was fueled by mastery. While on the trail, the Tracker group made a breakthrough. They discovered a hidden canyon, rarely used, nearly invisible, accessible only through a narrow passage cut through rock. Deep inside, they found fresh campfire logs, a stash of food supplies, and long-range radios tuned to frequencies typically used by paramilitary groups. The air felt thick with danger, but also with answers. This canyon wasn't just a hideout. It was a base, a staging ground, a temporary headquarters. The rival crew wasn't improvising. They were preparing for something massive. At the same time, the Disruptor group located a storage container buried beneath a junkyard on the far side of town. Inside were crates of imported weapons, illegal, high-grade, and out of place for a small, resurrected crew. Someone bigger was backing them. Someone with money, influence, or power. The discovery shifted everything they thought they knew. This wasn't just personal vengeance. This was organized, funded, calculated. The rival crew wasn't just coming back. They were being resurrected by someone pulling strings from the shadows. And that unknown puppeteer was far more dangerous than any old enemy. Back at the compound, the president pieced together all the new intel. Every clue pointed to one unsettling truth. The attack on Brother Four was simply the opening move in a much larger plan. One designed to destabilize the club, provoke retaliation, and create chaos that someone else could exploit. "We're not fighting just them," he said. "We're fighting whoever is behind them." The men exchanged wary glances. The battlefield had expanded, but their determination hardened. The enemy might have expanded their reach, but so had the club's resolve. As evening fell and the desert wind swept across the compound, the club circled their bikes in silence. They didn't know exactly who they were facing. Not yet. But they knew this. Brother Four's death had awakened something fierce inside them. Not recklessness. Not desperation. Purpose. The kind of purpose that binds men tighter than fear, stronger than steel, deeper than blood. And as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in burning orange, the president spoke only one sentence. Quiet, steady, and absolute. Tomorrow, we stop running their game, and they start running from ours. The road that carried them through loss, fury, and revelation eventually brought them somewhere deeper than justice. It brought them back to themselves. What began as grief over a fallen brother became a journey into loyalty, memory, and the weight of every bond they had ever sworn. They didn't just uncover the truth behind the ambush. They uncovered the truth of who they were when the world tried to break them. And in the end, that truth mattered more than revenge. It reminded them that brotherhood isn't forged in the easy miles, but in the dark ones, where danger presses close and only loyalty lights the way. As the pieces finally settled, the president stood before his men with a clarity that hadn't been possible in the beginning. He realized that justice isn't about outgunning the enemy. It's about outlasting the storm. The rival crew tried to weaponize their past, but instead awakened the unshakable bond that held them together. The memory of Brother Ford didn't pull them into darkness. It became the compass that guided them out of it. Through every clue they uncovered, every trap they avoided, and every truth they pieced together, they proved something powerful. You cannot break a family built on loyalty, honor, and sacrifice. In the final stretch of their journey, the men saw that what they had truly avenged wasn't just the life of one brother. It was the integrity of their road. They confronted the ghosts that tried to rise again, dismantled the lies woven to divide them, and stepped back into the world with a renewed understanding of their purpose. Even as unanswered questions lingered, they knew they had reclaimed something priceless, the strength to face whatever came next. The storm that once threatened to consume them had instead sharpened them, leaving behind a unity no enemy could ever fracture again. And as the sun set on the long, punishing chapter they had survived, the club gathered one last time to honor Brother Ford. Not with silence or sorrow, but with stories, laughter, and the roar of engines lifted to the sky. They carried his memory not as a wound, but as a fire, a reminder that some lives never truly fade. They echo through every mile, every choice, every heartbeat of those left behind. His legacy didn't end on that highway. It lived on in every rider who refused to let his name be forgotten. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of loyalty, courage, and standing unbroken in the face of loss, then stay connected with us. Subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and give the video a like to help these stories reach more people who need them. Together, we keep these roads alive, these lessons burning, and these stories riding forward. One brother, one heart, one journey at a time.